Hello friends, today I'll explain an important current affairs topic. It is related to a major international environmental conference recently concluded in Montreal, Canada, which promised to take an urgent action to protect and conserve the world biodiversity. That is COP15 related to Convention on Biological Diversity. You call it as United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. So this summit COP15 is very important because it has its own significance. And some students may confuse, sir, recently we have concluded a COP27 in Egypt. That conference of parties 27 is related to a different convention, that is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is UNFCCC. It is about that. But this is another conference of parties related to a different convention, that is Convention on Biodiversity or Biological Diversity. This summit is important because it has its own significance. In the year 2015, we have signed a COP21 of UNFCCC, and in the year 2022, we have agreed on something of United Nations Convention on Biodiversity. Many of the environmentalists and many of the countries, they are drawing a parallel between these two summits or these two conference of parties, because in both the cases we have fixed some targets and we persuaded the countries to accept to the targets, and a very specific targets we fixed, because prior to that the targets we fixed or the way we are engaging is having little bit vagueness, but now we come to some specification, and that too this is a major agreement on climate change and this is another major agreement on biodiversity. That is why it is important. Now I will come to the conventions, because you must understand what is this United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, when it started came into effect, and what are the different type of conference of parties and the major decisions taken in earlier conference of parties, and what is this conference of parties 15, where it was held, and what were the deliberations that took place in this, and what is India's position and concerns, that I will discuss in this video. Okay, first, this whole concept of this conference of parties or the different conventions related to biodiversity has its own genesis in 1992 Earth Summit, which took place in Rio de Janeiro. Earth Summit. So during this 1992 Earth Summit, when different countries met, they have started discussing about environmental issues in toto, and in that they want to sign some specific conventions related to the different aspects of environment, and those conventions which they want to sign are United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, United Nations Convention on Combating Desertification, United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. These are the three major conventions that we want to sign, that we discussed it in the year 1992. We haven't signed anything in the year 1992, but deliberation took place. If you see the three conventions, they are related to each other and they are in together related to environment. Sometimes you can see the overlap also. See, this is related to climate change. Because of increasing in carbon emissions or greenhouse gases emissions, the climate is changing, the global temperature is changing, that is creating lot of problem. We need to contain it. So that is related to UNFCCC. Second one is related to this combating desertification. The forest or the green cover on this earth or on this planet, it is completely vanishing either because of natural reasons or because of man-made reasons. So we need to combat that process of becoming desert, that is we call it as desertification. This is related to diversity. Biodiversity is vanishing because of some reasons, both natural and man-made, and we need to have some proper understanding about this biodiversity and we need to protect it. So this biodiversity, desertification, climate change, they are actually interlinked, and some aspects of these three conventions are overlapping with each other. But still we are having a different conventions, and each and every convention is having its own parties. That means the members who sign to this convention, and these parties will meet at a regular interval of time. That is why you call it as conference of parties. So in conference of parties, the parties to this convention will meet and they will try to discuss about the targets that we need to achieve under this convention. Likewise, you are having the COP for this, and likewise you are having the COP for this. Apart from these three conventions, there are other conventions, and the respective conventions are having the respective parties, and they will convene and they are having their own different COPs. So the moment when you see the COP, immediately you have to looking into to which convention these parties are these parties belongs to. So the COP 27 recently held in Egypt it is related to this convention. Now today we are discussing about this convention because this convention recently concluded in Montreal, that is in the country Canada, and in that the countries promised to take an urgent action to protect and restore the biodiversity of the world. Now, under this COP 15 of United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, first I will give the theme. The theme of COP 15 is ecological civilization, because sometimes you may get ecological civilization, and the building a shared future for for all life on earth. So this is the theme of COP 15 UNCBD. Now in this convention we are discussing about the biological diversity. So what is the biological diversity? Biological diversity means along with the human being on this planet, variety of life forms are living together and they are coexisting with each other. And according to the environmentalist and according to the science that is dealing about this nature and the behavior of nature, is concluding that each and every life form on this earth, whether it is flora and fauna, they are having their own specific role. And if at all we want to maintain the balance of this whole ecosystem or this whole planet, we must allow the coexistence of all life forms together, and for that we need to preserve and we need to protect and we need to restore that biological diversity. If we don't protect, if we don't restore the damaged biological diversity, then this world, this whole mother planet cannot be said to be in balance. And this conference is to identify the causes for the degradation of the biological diversity and how we need to restore and how we need to protect. So this is something related to United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. But this United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity has recognized three types of biodiversity. One is ecosystem diversity, second one is species diversity, third one is genetic diversity. 3 levels of diversity. That means there are different type of ecosystems are there. Forest ecosystem is there, grassland ecosystem is there, marine ecosystem is there, coastal ecosystem, riverine ecosystem, desert ecosystem. Like that, different type of ecosystems are there. Each and every ecosystem having its own species, its own diversity of species. So first of all, we must protect the different ecosystem. The diversity is present at the ecosystem level. And in an ecosystem, variety of species are there that include different type of plants and animals. Different type of plants and animals. That is species diversity. And within a species, there is a genetic diversity. Everything we call it as elephant, but there is a genetic variation between the elephants. Everything we call it as the monkeys, but in monkeys it is a genetic variation. Likewise, we need to protect each and every genetic variety of plant and animal. So that is genetic diversity. So these 3 diversities recognized by this convention. And this convention is having a broader objectives. This convention is having broader objectives. That means the mission, or I can say the vision of this diversity, this convention. Here we are having 4. First one is it is related to the conservation of biodiversity. Conservation of biodiversity. That means we need to conserve it. We need to protect it, we need to save it from any threats, we need to take care it properly. The whole biodiversity, the ecosystem biodiversity, the ecosystem and the species and the genetic level. So these 3 things must be conserved. Next one is sustainable use of biodiversity. Sustainable use of biodiversity. So I already told, we are living together. There is a coexistence among these diverse species. So definitely one will depending on other. Especially the human being, he is depending on the different type of life forms for its own survival. Now if you don't use them, you can't grow or you can't live. And if you over exploit, that leads to the damage of biodiversity. So in this second objective, you must depend on biodiversity. You must use the biodiversity, but that use should not lead to over exploitation, but it should be in a sustainable way. Sustainable way in the sense, it must cater the needs of your generation, and at the same time it must also cater the needs of the future generations. In that way you have to keep that numbers. So this is a second thing. Third one is fair and equitable sharing of. Fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of the utilization of the genetic resources. That means now we are having a different type of flora and fauna. Variety of species are there. Suppose if you want to use the benefit of any genetic diversity of any particular species, if you get any benefit out of that, that must be shared equally to the owners of that particular variety. I will give an example so that you can understand. See, take the case of a species, let it be a plant which is having medicinal value. That plant got that medicinal value because of its genetic diversity. Now you want to make a medicine out of that. Suppose you have used it and you are successfully made a medicine out of it. Then you got lot of profit. You must share that benefits to the custodian of that genetic resources. That means it can be aboriginal people or it can be a forest dweller who are living in that area, who conserve that particular biodiversity over a period of centuries. So the benefits that are arising out of the utilization of the genetic resources must be shared, and that share must be fair and equitable. So this is another important aspect. The fourth one is, it is something related to this convention is seeks to address all the threats. It seeks to address all the threats to biodiversity and ecological, or I can say ecosystem services. Ecosystem services. So what are the threats to the biodiversity and what are the ecosystem service? I'll explain in a minute, but these are the four aspects. So conservation of biodiversity, sustainable use of biodiversity, fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the utilization of the genetic resources, and this convention seeks to address all the threats to the biodiversity and ecosystem services. So this is the main or broad agenda of this convention. Came into effect in 1993 and India has ratified it in the year 1994. This is India. And this is something a legal instrument for the conservation of the biodiversity. That means whatever you agreed, that is legally binding on you, you have to implement it. Okay. So this is, now I will come to what are the major threats to the biodiversity and what are the ecosystem services, because this is important, we must understand. And ecosystem services. So first of all, I will focus on ecosystem services. There are the ecosystem, that means either it can be a forest ecosystem, grassland ecosystem. The ecosystem that I have given earlier, they are providing lot of services to the human being. See, it is from food, fodder, clean air, like oxygen, water. It also influencing the water cycle, and it is also stabilizing the temperature. That means it is stabilizing the climate. It is giving the shelter to the forest dwellers, and it is providing economic benefit. It is providing medicinal benefits, educational thing, recreation purpose, aesthetic, like there are different type of services provided by the ecosystem to the human beings. Now apart from this, there are other scientific services also this ecosystem is providing. If your biodiversity is under threat, then the services are also under threat. So you must protect the biodiversity and also you must also protect the ecosystem services. Now what are the threats to this biodiversity? There are various type of threats to this biodiversity. See, the threat starts from your basic thing, that is deforestation. That means clearing the forest for any developmental purpose, for agricultural purpose, for the construction of major irrigation projects, it can be anything. So the deforestation and deforestation is one important thing, and displacement is happening because of some developmental activities that is also affecting the biodiversity. Next, the land degradation because of overgrazing or some other reasons. Next one, because of climate change. Because of this climate change, you can see in many countries now the forest fires has become a frequent incident, and in the forest fire the variety of species that include both plant and animal are vanishing. So climate change is another thing, and apart from climate change, the pollution, because anyway pollution led to climate change. So pollution and climate change, these are some of the reasons. And apart from the climate change and pollution, our agricultural practices is one important thing, because if you take the agricultural practices, there are two aspects majorly. One is usage of pesticides, fertilizers, herbicides. They are leading to the loss of biodiversity. See, if you use the herbicides, different type of plant varieties you may kill, and if you use the pesticide, different type of pests you may kill, and if you use the fertilizers, that leads to eutrophication, and that will completely destroying a pond or lake ecosystem. So that is one aspect. Second one is related to these genetically modified crops or genetically modified animals. And in genetically modified crops in agriculture, because of their superior quality, in terms of production and productivity, people are shifting to these GM crops. As a result, the variety of conventional or traditional seeds are vanishing from the land. That is one important thing. So that is why agriculture is also a reason for the threat to the biodiversity, not agriculture, our agricultural practices. The another important thing is invasive species. This is another important thing, because these species are new to the ecosystem. So there is no predator, there is no prey and predator relation to this invasive species, because it's a new thing. No animal or no cattle want to graze on this plant, or if it is an animal, no animal want to kill this particular new thing. So as there is no such prey and predator relationship with invasive species, now it continuously occupying that particular ecosystem. So that is how it is vanishing the existing species, and this is becoming a dominant species over a period of time. So that is another thing. And another important thing is the threats to the maritime biodiversity. Yes, this is a separate thing, like this water pollution, plastic pollution, the pollution related to oil spills. So these are all the things. Okay, and even because of the climate change, if the ocean temperature increases, some of the plants and some of the animals inside the ocean may not survive. Okay. Next, the forest dwellers. It is in not all the cases, but in some cases the forest dwellers are themselves, because of their poaching and hunting, they are also destructing the biodiversity. So once you understand the services provided by the biodiversity and the threat to the biodiversity, yes, we need to protect the biodiversity from all these threats, so that you can get a good amount of services. That is the whole theme of this United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. And according to this particular convention, only 1.75 million species, we have identified, and according to their own estimation, the total amount of species that are available are around 13 million, and we need to identify them. So this is broader aspects of this convention. Now under this convention, till now we have discussed we have concluded 15 meetings, and each and everything you call it as Conference of Parties. So Conference of Parties 1 started in the year 1994 in the country called Bahamas, and after that we have signed 15 agreements. I am not going to explain each and everything, but the COP14, the earlier one, it was held in the year 2018 in Egypt. Okay. But in between COP1 and COP15, I will come to that later, and in between COP1 and COP14, there are important protocols we signed. There are two important things, I will explain it because they are very important. First one is related to Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. It was happened, the meeting was held in Cartagena in the country Colombia, and there we have agreed on biosafety, but it came into existence, or it came into effect in 2003. And the United States of America is not party to this convention. Okay, this whole convention. Anyway, it came into effect in the year 2003. See, this is dealing about this particular protocol, because protocol is nothing but it is an agreement under a broader convention. So this Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, it covers this biotechnology or the genetically modified organisms. See, if you do a genetic modification to a particular plant or animal, if it is useful for the human being and if it is increasing the productivity, and so that we can reduce the problem of food scarcity and we can enhance the food security, definitely we need to do. But this particular protocol seek to protect the biodiversity from the genetically modified organisms. Your technology, your genetic modification should not become threat to the biodiversity. In that way you have to develop, and in that way you have to treat, and in that way you have to handle it, and in that way you have to use it. That means this seeks to protect biodiversity from the genetically modified organisms by ensuring their safe handling, safe transport, safe use. Suppose you come up with a new crop, genetically modified crop, you have to grow it separately under specific condition, and this particular thing should not become threat to the biodiversity. So that is Cartagena Protocol. And after that there was another thing called Nagoya Protocol. It was in 2010. Nagoya Protocol. So Nagoya Protocol, it was held in Japan. Nagoya Protocol is dealing about the third objective or the third mission point of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, that is related to the share the benefits arising from the utilization of the genetic resources in a fair and equitable manner, and to implement it we have come up with a protocol, and that is Nagoya Protocol in 2010. And there is another important thing that happened in Nagoya Protocol in the year 2010, that is we call it as a strategic plan for biodiversity. Strategic plan for biodiversity. This was agreed in Nagoya Protocol in 2010. What is the strategic plan for biodiversity? And that too, that plan is from 2011 to 2020. And these thing we also call it as Aichi biodiversity targets. Aichi biodiversity targets. So Aichi is a region in which the city Nagoya located. So we call it as Aichi biodiversity targets. These targets need to be achieved by 2020. So this and this is same. Okay, we need to achieve it by 2020. And under this we are having a 5 broader goals. 5 broader goals and 20 different targets, and these goals and targets you need to achieve it by 2020. And these 5 broader goals you call it as goal A, B, C, D, E. So what are these 5 broader goals? These 5 broader goals includes addresses the causes of biodiversity loss and reduce the pressure on biodiversity, and participatory planning in protecting the biodiversity, and safeguarding the ecosystem, and benefits must be shared that we are getting out of the utilization of the genetic resources in a fair and equitable manner. So these are the 5 broader goals. Under that we are having 20 targets, and this ended in 2020. Once this is ended in 2020, you need to have new targets. You need to have new targets, and for that new targets we have brought a new targets in the new conference of parties, that is this year conference of parties, that is COP15. But before I go for the new targets, what is the progress of the Aichi biodiversity targets? Have we achieved it? So just I will spend 2 minutes on the achievement of Aichi biodiversity targets. And according to the United Nations assessment, no country in the world has fulfilled these targets of Nagoya Protocol, or I can say Aichi biodiversity targets. Why actually we are unable to achieve it? There are some specific reasons. I will tell you. See, the reason for the, you can call it as failure, but some people are not interested to call it as a failure, and India say like we are in the process of achieving the Aichi biodiversity targets, but literally 2020 it's already completed and we have not achieved the target. The reason for not achievement is, first one is, this is something related to the targets. the targets are vague in nature. The targets are vague in nature. If you want to achieve a target, definitely you must have a very specific target, and you must have a very a measurable target. You can't simply say like, okay, biodiversity should be enhanced or should be protected, we need to conserve. Again it has become vague, and they have not devised any particular strategy, they have left it to the parties, that means the parties to the conference. So because of this vagueness of the targets, or because of this not having specification or not having a measurable target, we have unable to achieve the targets. That is one thing. Second one is monitoring mechanism. Okay, we are having the targets, but we don't have a monitoring mechanism. No one is there to monitor whether you achieved it or not. What are the problem in achieving it? Why you are unable to achieve? Does you really require any extra support? It's not there. So that is another important thing. And the third important thing is related to the finances. Because majority of the countries are developing or least developed countries, they are having only limited resources to cater their own country's developmental needs, and you are bringing another new targets and they don't have the finances. Who is responsible for this degradation of the whole ecosystem? Is that country alone? No, some countries are already destroying this whole biodiversity over a period of time, and they are not sharing any responsibility. These countries, especially the developing and the least developed countries, are having only limited resources. So you have not created any resource pool. And anyway, here actually there is a mechanism called Global Environment Facility, but that Global Environment Facility is able to give only some $5 billion, that is not at all sufficient. So this finances, monitoring mechanism and vagueness in the targets has led to the failure of Aichi biodiversity targets, and no country could not achieve these 20 targets. So now we are entering into a new phase, because we have already committed on the climate change targets, and even when it comes to the combating desertification also, we are having some measurable targets. Now we wanted to bring that measurable targets in this convention also, and we did it in the year 2022 with this COP15 of this Convention on Biological Diversity. Now I will come to this year COP15. Actually this COP15 has divided, actually this could have been happened in 2020, but because of COVID-19 it got postponed. Now we have split the COP15 meeting into two. First one in the year 2021, it was held in China in the city called Kunming, and it is an online meeting. But in the year 2022 in the city called Montreal in Canada, all the countries physically participated and we have come to an agreement. That is why the agreement which we signed, or the conclusions that we got, we call normally it as Kunming-Montreal Agreement. Kunming-Montreal. So Kunming-Montreal, because it is the same summit, but we have split it into two phases, and because of this, and it was held it in two cities, that is, one is Kunming and second one is Montreal. And 188 out of 196, because the total number of countries to this convention is 196, in this 188 countries are adopted this Kunming-Montreal Agreement, and this we also call it as Global Biodiversity Framework. We also call it as GBF, Global Biodiversity Framework. Then what we agreed in Global Biodiversity Framework are this agreement. There are two things. One is, we have agreed on, first of all, 4 major goals. 4 major goals. Like how we have 5 major goals in Aichi biodiversity targets. We need to achieve it by 2050. Second one is, we have 23 targets and we need to achieve it by 2030. So these are the two things, 4 major goals, 23 targets. What are these 4 major goals? Again I am writing it as A, B, C, D. So first major goal is maintaining ecosystem integrity and health to halt the extinction. So you must maintain the integrity and health of the ecosystem so that you can halt the extinction process, because some of the species are extincting from the wild. This is not at all acceptable. If one species is extincted from the wild, don't think like it will have its own effect on only that species. No, it will have its own effect on the whole ecosystem. So that is why this is the first thing. Second one is measuring and valuing. This is important. Measuring and valuing ecosystem services, because today we are getting these ecosystem services at free of cost. We are getting the rain at free of cost. We are getting the clean oxygen at free of cost. So as long as it is free of cost, you don't understand its importance. So first of all, you measure and valuing the ecosystem service, then the country started understanding it. Next, this is related to the third objective of this UNCBD, that is sharing the monetary and non-monetary benefits. Sharing monetary and non-monetary benefits arising out of the utilization of the genetic resources fair and equitably. Yes, you must do it. The fourth broader goal is related to resources or finances, because this was lacking in the Aichi biodiversity target clearly. Resources, it talked about the resources. So raising the resources for all the countries to close the biodiversity financing gap, and that amount is something like $700 billion by 2050. Okay. So first one is protecting the integrity and health of the ecosystem, thereby we can halt the extinction. Second one is measuring and valuing the ecosystem services. Third one is the sharing the benefits with the indigenous people and local communities. Fourth one is related to the resources. We need to raise around $700 billion from by 2050. It is from the different countries, different multilateral institutions, individual groups, NGOs, from everyone. Okay. So these are the four different broader goals. Now I will come to the targets. I don't give the 23 targets, but I will give few important targets which are important. See, these targets you need to achieve it by 2030. So the first major target. See, the first major target is 30% of the degraded terrestrial and marine ecosystem, marine and coastal ecosystem must be brought under restoration. At present, the 17% of the terrestrial system and 10% of the marine system under protection. Now we need to increase this to 30%. How we need to protect or how we need to restore? By declaring it as a wildlife sanctuary or by declaring it as a protected area. So we need to brought. So it is related to terrestrial and also related to marine and coastal. 30%. So at present it is 17 and 10, and we need to take it to the 30%. Second one. Second one is related to the introduction or establishment of the invasive species. So these invasive species are threat to the biodiversity. Now we need to reduce the rate of introduction or establishment of invasive species into the new ecosystem by 50% by 2030. Okay, these targets are for 2030. So this is another thing. So reduction in the rate of introduction of the or establishment of the invasive species. Third one is related to this financing. And in this financing they said the developing countries should get the resources from the developed world. At least for the first 5, that means from 20 up to 2025, at least you should get $20 billion per annum from the developed countries, and from 25 to 2030 at least $30 billion per annum from the developed world. Thereby you need to mobilize at least $200 billion by 2030 for restoring the biodiversity from the developed countries. That is another thing. Fourth one is related to the climate change and ocean acidification. So we need to reduce the climate change and as well as the ocean acidification. So it is related to that, climate change and ocean acidification. Another important the target is reduce the pollution risks and negative impact of the pollution from all sources, specifically talking about. Okay. Next there is another important target related to agriculture. Sixth one, it is important for India. So agriculture, aquaculture, fisheries and forestry must be managed sustainably. That means we must use a biodiversity friendly practices. The practices, whether it can be over exploitation, whether it can be usage of any chemicals like fertilizers, pesticides, we must avoid it. And we must use a environmentally sustainable practices, that is on agriculture. There is another important target related to the transfer of technology. It's not only resources, it's also related to the technology. It can be a technology to protect the biodiversity, a technology to make use of the genetic resources, like some the digital recording of the genetic resources, like that. So technology. And another important target is something related to gender equality in implementation and gender response approach while you are protecting the biodiversity. So it's related to gender, it's related to technology transfer, agricultural practices and pollution, climate change, ocean acidification, financing and the rate of introduction of the invasive species, and also in total the protection of the terrestrial and marine and coastal ecosystem. So these are some of the important targets, and India is party to it, and India has put its own view in this summit, and India is actually doing better on this biological diversity front, because if you looking into the India, actually after ratifying the Convention on Biological Diversity in the year 2002, this is related to India, in the year 2002 we have brought the Biological Diversity Act 2002, the Biological Diversity Act 2002 to implement the provisions of that convention. Under this particular legislation, we are protecting the biodiversity, and we are having, and under this particular agreement and under this particular legislation, we are having a different statutory bodies to protect or to conserve the biodiversity. This is something like a national biodiversity board and state level biodiversity board and a biodiversity management committee at the local level, at the national level, at the state level, at the local level. Yes, they are drawing the power from the legislation and they are implementing it. That is one aspect. Second one, if you see the forest and tree cover, if you see the forest and tree cover in India, it is increasing because of the efforts taken by both union and respective state governments. And even recently, if you see the wetlands that are under Ramsar, yes, they are increasing. We want to protect more wetlands. And even if you taken the number of some of the wildlife, it is increasing. Wildlife, it is increasing. And recently we introduced the cheetah in the Kuno National Park. So this is again, it's a testimony, or it's something like an evidence to substantiate our argument, like we are here to improve the biodiversity in India. And even there was a program started by our Prime Minister, we are all aware, that is lifestyle for environment. Lifestyle for environment. So lifestyle for environment means you have to change your lifestyle in such a way that it should not disturb the biodiversity or ecosystem. That means, is it not the sustainable use of biological resources? Yes. So that means this lifestyle is one of our program where we need to adapt our lifestyle according to the environmental needs. That means you need to protect the biodiversity. So this is another important thing. So in that way India said like we are protecting the biodiversity, but India is having two major concerns and it raised it in the platform, that means on that meeting. So the major two concerns of India is, one is related to the agricultural subsidies. So India is saying like in our country, it's not only in India but in majority of the countries, majority of the people are depending on agricultural practices. So such an essential support given to the vulnerable sections, we should not consider it as a subsidy and you should not put a limit on them. Because if you put a limit on providing the subsidy for the farmers for purchasing of fertilizers and pesticides or something, definitely it will impact the farmers. It may protect the biodiversity, but it may affect the whole food security also. That doesn't mean that you should allow more subsidies for using pesticides. Definitely we need to shift to the organic farming, and India did it, and India is in the process of doing it. But the only thing is that subsidies, you should not consider it as a subsidy under this Convention on Biological Diversity, because they are vulnerable section, support is necessary. So that is the first one. Second one is India clearly raised about the funding pattern and the technological transfer. So funding pattern and technology transfer, because the nature itself is under stress. The nature itself is under stress because of the greenhouse gas emissions. Who are responsible for it? Who are responsible for the destruction of this whole biodiversity and the climate? It is the developed countries. So they must have more responsibility, they must contribute more resources, and they must transfer more technology to the developing world. So this is what India is raising. So these are the India's concern. Okay, so this is something related to COP15 of United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, or Kunming-Montreal Agreement, or Global Biodiversity Framework, and the respective targets and India's achievement and India's concern. Okay, thank you.
Amrita IAS Academy.